Hey everyone, thank you for joining this little experiment with me. We'll try this and see how it goes. I appreciate you submitting some images. Hopefully this is helpful to you. So I'm just going to get right into it. The first image that was submitted was by, and forgive me if I'm pronouncing your name right, but Fadi. A really nice image with, I believe, a Leica Q3, so really sweet camera. There's a couple things I really like about this image. I love the kind of silhouetted figures on the corners here. Oopsies, let me get my pen pulled up. You know, the kind of balance between those two is really nice. I love that. I love how there's kind of a silhouette of each of their faces. This one on the right especially, I love how it's framed. There's kind of a frame within a frame here with this window. Obviously this one, you know, it's not quite doing that. But, I mean, the face is kind of framed in there, which is nice. And then there is kind of a focal piece right here with the kind of condiments of the table, which is nice. And then, you know, the background's nice too. There's a, you know, sort of a sunset going on, which is really pretty. And it feels like we're on a boat or maybe at a restaurant or something. You know, there's some nice kind of sort of rule of thirds framing going on here. And then, you know, obviously the benches are pretty well kind of aligned out there. So a lot of really nice things going on. So a few bits of feedback. Oopsies. Few bits of feedback, I guess I would say. The thing that I first noticed when I looked at this image was how the sky was blown out. So there's some really nice, or there would have been some really nice details here in the sky that are just gone. You can kind of see that they've all turned to white. And it is really tough to deal with that, you know, especially if you're shooting JPEG. But if you were able to underexpose this one a little bit more, especially if you could shoot it in RAW, and then, you know, recover some of that detail while also preserving, you know, the detail in the shadows, that could actually have been really nice. It would have been cool to see some more of the details of the sunset there. And, you know, you could have also pushed the exposure down perhaps some more, because, you know, it's not like the details of these people's faces are really contributing, like they're just kind of silhouettes. And so that could have been darker. Another thing that I noticed was that the people seem a bit stretched. Like there's a you know, a wide angle distortion happening here, which the Q3 has a 28mm lens, maybe even wider depending on your opinion. And, you know, it's definitely going to stretch things. So one thing I did kind of wish for was that you maybe could have taken a step back. I don't know if that was even possible, but if it could have been a little bit farther back so that the people weren't quite so close to the edges, and then, you know, that stretching and kind of distortion that happens when you get things near the edges of a wide angle lens might not have been so strong. That could have been cool. And then, you know, this is getting really nitpicky, but like there's just like some lines here that aren't quite straight. They're nearly straight, but they're not quite. Like that could have been fixed in post, like with something like the perspective tool. And then the other thing is, you know, like there's an opportunity for the condiments here to be aligned between, there's kind of two vertical lines. You know, if those had lined up like there, I mean, that's just like how I like to do things. I'm such a nerd about aligning everything like that. It's not really taking away from the picture, but I do kind of wonder if you could have stepped back and then like moved over to the right just a little bit, you know, could you have aligned everything up and kind of made everything fit that way? It could have just been, you know, where you're sitting in this restaurant or whatever, and it's certainly a great capture. So good job. Not a whole lot to really criticize or critique with this one. This one was really interesting. This was by Blue Moon Kiss Love. And they were asking, actually for feedback here, I guess they loaded some ISO 80 film into their camera before coming into this library. And we're actually kind of asking, like, how could they have done this better? You know, you can see it's a little bit blurry. I think they had to balance it on a staircase or something like that, they were saying, which makes sense. You know, it's a darker environment and you have a very low ISO film. So what do? I think you did the best thing you could, which is, you know, stabilize it on something and then, you know, go for the shutter speed that you can get away with and hope for the best. You know, depending on the lens you have, maybe you can open up the aperture all the way. You know, also, look, this looks like maybe it's like around a 50mm or something like that. So, you know, you could maybe take the shutter speed all the way down to 30. If you're like stabilizing it on something, maybe 15. You know, this definitely looks like there's some motion blur happening. The other thing that you can do in this situation is just underexpose, and you're going to get some kind of faded, less detail in the shadows kind of happening there with film. You know, you can recover some of that in post, but it's you know, it's going to have a different look to it. But it could be cool, and so you kind of have to weigh Would I rather a little bit of a blurry photo with some really clean blacks, or some faded blacks but with a less motion blur photo? You know, it's kind of the tough call that you have to make. As far as the image itself, you know, it is interesting. I kind of wished that it was either more diagonal or more straight. It's kind of in the middle here. You know, you've got some diagonal lines kind of this way, that way, that way. You know, there's a bit of a diagonal, but it's not quite like really a diagonal. It's almost straight, but not quite. And so I was kind of wishing that it was one or the other. I'm sure you're limited by where you're actually standing, where you're able to go, but that would have been interesting. But it was nice to, you know, to be able to see all the chairs here. Now I did notice, you know, up here, there's some kind of detail that doesn't really seem to matter. It's actually a little bit distracting to have some kind of lighter stuff coming through. And then it could have been nice to see kind of the bottom of this column and, you know, a little bit more space around there. I think you had mentioned that it was hard to know what you were actually pointing at. I don't know if this is maybe a rangefinder, so you're guessing. But yeah, I guess I wished it would have been aimed down a little bit. And then if you could have gone to the right or to the left to make it either more straight or more diagonal, that would have, I think, made it a little bit better for me. But it's a nice shot. I do enjoy it. Now let's move on to the next one. This is by... You know, I've read your name so many times, and I realize I say agyemann in my head. I don't know if that's how you pronounce it. We've talked a lot. You're agyemann in my head. Let me know if that's not the right way to say it. But I really like this image. It's got a lot going on for it. I love the wide angle perspective that really captures a lot of the scene. It's very straight. It's cool how the kind of spires of, I'm presuming this is like a temple, are, you know, kind of shooting up into the sky. A lot of really good detail. The black and white treatment's pretty cool. The sky is really interesting looking. It's a pretty great shot. Really, my only critique of this one is that it feels like the sky has been darkened too much, to the point where it's darker than the foreground, which, you know, it definitely couldn't have been like that in real life. And so it kind of has a little bit of that sort of HDR effect where it just looks a little bit unrealistic. So I would have liked to see the sky, you know, still the detail preserved, but not darkened quite so much to where you really notice that it's been darkened. You know, I think the sky should probably be brighter than, or at least equal to the, you know, the ground down here. But it does definitely bring out the details and everything. So I think there could have been a way to balance that. But otherwise, it's a really cool shot. And I'll move along since you submitted two. This was another one that I really liked. This tennis ball caught in the, you know, caught mid-frame, with all these cool diagonals, and, you know, there's a lot of interesting stuff going on here. I mean, we've kind of got like a bit of a frame within a frame here, you know, framing the tennis ball. There's some really strong diagonals going on, almost getting into some kind of dynamic symmetry. You know, you can argue about whether, you know, maybe this line would have been better to kind of go more like that, and this one kind of, you know, like that might have been better if it was more like that, you know, kind of aligning to the dynamic symmetry grid. But it's very strong how it is. The colors are great. I love how the tennis ball is kind of captured. You know, I do wonder, you know, I don't know if there was like something up here that was distracting, but like if we could have changed the perspective so that this was a little bit more here and then everything moved up a little bit, you know, that could have been cool. And there's a, you know, this thing down here might have been avoided had you done that. I don't know. I'm only noticing that now looking at it so closely, but it's really not distracting, and it's a very cool composition. So really great job on this one. And then the last one here by Josedelapuente. Really nice, very colorful, almost looks like Aurora Borealis maybe. I'm guessing that this is a nighttime long exposure kind of a shot. It's really pretty, lots of great colors. The composition is, you know, very simple, but I love how the ground is really kind of low in the composition, and it's creating a lot of negative space at the top and a lot of just a feeling of vastness, you know, because there's so much room in the frame. And then it really kind of brings the emphasis to those really bright colors because everything else is black, which is really cool. The only thing I would maybe suggest is being careful with the saturation. So you can kind of see here, there's something called banding that's happening where you, I don't know if you can see it, but there's, you know, these kind of circular lines happening. That's from the transition from like one color value to the next. You know, it happens at high ISO images or a long exposure like this. You know, I'm guessing the original image that wasn't too visible because they can kind of keep it pretty smooth. But then when you really start pushing an image like that with contrast, exposure, saturation, all that stuff in the JPEG really starts to show itself, and it can be a little bit unnatural. So what you can do to combat that is, you know, pull back on the exposure or on the contrast, pull back on the saturation, or, you know, try to apply it a little bit gently in certain areas, like if you're using a program where you can, you know, apply it with a brush. The other thing you could try to do would be to actually blur the sky, because there's not like any fine details in the sky. This would take like Photoshop or something like that, but you know, you could try to do that and basically blur over those lines so that just the kind of color blobs remain, and then you can boost the saturation like that. So just be careful with the saturation boosting to create those kind of artifacts, but you know, it's a really nice photo. So thank you all. This has been really cool. I hope to do some more of these. Help me spread the word. Let's get some more submissions and keep this going. And please feel free also to, you know, give comments on other people's images. You know, keep it positive, keep it helpful. But I find a lot of value in this. So thank you all. Talk to you soon.